Hi, folks. Welcome back to the Shifting Schools podcast. My name is Tricia Friedman, and on this week, we are asking a really big umbrella question. What if the real story about AI and cheating isn't about technology at all, but it's actually about trust, design, how we listen to one another in education? This week, I have the joy of speaking with Jesse Dukes and Dr. Justin Reich, who are the creators behind a new podcast, which is called The Homework Machine. This is a series that explores how generative AI is reshaping classrooms and conversations about academic integrity and much more. Jesse is a longtime journalist and audio producer whose work at MIT's Teaching Systems Lab and with outlets like WBEZ and Virginia Quarterly Review reveals how listening deeply can change what we think we know about education in schools. Justin is the director of the MIT Teaching Systems Lab, a researcher, and author of Failure to Disrupt, whose work examines how innovations in learning technologies actually play out in real classrooms. Together, their new show brings humility, data, storytelling into one of the biggest and hardest questions that we are being asked to define right now. What does it mean to learn? Stay tuned, folks, because right after this, you will hear a snippet from their show, The Homework Machine, that, again, demonstrates their enormous effort to get teachers and students on the record about this moment we are in. Here's that snippet.
There's so many things that I've encountered where I'm like, I would love to do that, but it takes so much work and it takes so much time. And I'll be honest, like as a teacher, there's like sometimes a feeling of like, well, you know what? Like, I'm not a curriculum designer. Like, should I be going and doing all of this work for free, you know? But at the end of the day, it's not going to happen. So I have to do it. Right. So being able to work with the smartest curriculum designer that's ever existed and have that at my disposal is incredible.
And with that, please welcome Jesse and Justin to the show. I'm really excited to talk about The Homework Machine. I am not just a podcaster, but I'm an avid listener, and your show was really bingeable. And I have to say, something that I really respected about what you did was you listened to so many people, and you listened to teachers, administrators, folks who have expertise with academic integrity, as well as students. I wonder if we can open with you talking about how the homework machine was really only possible because of the depth of the research and the willingness, I think, to really say, tell it to us how it is. Speak your truth.
Thank you. Justin, do you want to take that one? I'll start by telling one of my favorite stories from Jesse's reporting because it's something that I think is actionable for all of your listeners. Jesse went to a professional development conference, and we love going to events like that because we like interviewing teachers and we like helping out, but we also like hearing what they're saying to each other. But by far the most popular event on the schedule, the event that had the teachers sitting on the very edges of their seats, putting their phone down, closing their laptops, really listening, was when they had a panel of 3 or 4 of their students in the district coming and talking about their experiences with AI and just being in an environment in the summer where they felt like they could be really candid with their superintendents, their principals, their teachers. There is no there's almost nothing that happens in education which would not be enriched by asking students what they think, promising them that you'll take their responses seriously, and then listening. Because if there's a thing that you get from the first few episodes of The Homework Machine is how observant and thoughtful and wise students are. Not that they are always right. They make terrible decisions. They make terrible decisions for themselves. They cause all kinds of problems for their teachers. And they know this. They can tell you in very thoughtful ways about the bad decisions they make and the dilemmas they find themselves in. But listening to the people closest to the challenges is almost always the right starting point for dealing with any change in education. And Jesse and his team, I think, did a masterful job finding lots of interesting people to listen to and listening to them really carefully and capturing their stories.
I think one thing I could add to that is that when this started, which was about a year and a half ago, we didn't really know what we were making. And that has to do with the way in which we were very lucky in a series of grant applications that allowed the funding to go from enough to talk to maybe 30 teachers and 10 students to enough to do something quite a bit more ambitious. And so we knew this topic was on teachers' minds due to earlier research and reporting. And I think some useful advice I got from Justin, which is don't start with, hey, are the students cheating using AI? Or, hey, is AI helping you in the classroom? Start with, how's your year going? What do you do? What are your days like? And then once we had a sense, and this is true for students and teachers, but once we had a sense of somebody's sort of routines and how they felt about their school and what their life was like, we started introducing questions about AI. And even then, we tried not to ask, is it a problem? Is it something that we tried to ask questions that were open-ended. Who's using AI in your schools? Students, teachers, you? And then, if students are using it, are they using it in a way that you think is appropriate? And often that would take us to similar stories. But I think starting in that way too, I think we got just a richer portrait of who people are. And also we allowed the teachers and we allowed the students to bring up what was top of mind for them as well.
And Justin, to your point earlier about like poor decision-making, mistakes, adults do this too. And I think at the heart of the show is really just that when we're talking about technology, we're talking about people and their relationships, and to the extent that trust exists in those relationships. And of course, school can be a real pressure cooker for a wide variety of reasons. I have to say, I feel like at multiple points in the podcast journey, I hear a version of, wow, that student response was so thoughtful. Think about the wisdom in what they're saying. And I really appreciated how you just hammer that point home, that when we have time to reflect, when we give one another that space and time to reflect, gosh, we can learn so much. And I wonder if you think it's a fair characterization for me to say, when we're talking about AI and academic integrity, we're also really talking about the extent to which school assessments are well designed or relevant, which I think it's not always that AI is the culprit here. Do you feel like, do you want to call lie on that, or does that feel a little bit accurate?
I'll let Justin take that one too.
Absolutely. New forms of generative AI are unearthing the spit and duct tape that we use to hold our education system together. And there are lots of parts that we would look at and go, man, I wish there was a better version of that. I wish that the assessments we made were things that students just wanted to do, just really found fun and found engaging, and we wouldn't have to make them. We wouldn't have to make them do it. We would have to skip them. Why can't? And then you get into these questions, which are like, why can't all of the assignments be fun? And I think it's great to ask those kinds of questions, to ask questions about what might make things more engaging. But I would say over my 25 years mucking around as an adult in schools, over time, I have come to appreciate more that even the things that aren't the best or aren't as good as we wish they were, might still be the best there are. It's quite good to make students do things they don't like. It's good to make them study topics they're not interested in, because that's how some of them become interested in it. Just about anything that's worth learning has parts of it which are like, oh, this part is grind, and we're just going to have to get through this grind part to get to the other more beautiful, more interesting part over there. And so I think as every teacher, every school leader is forced to put on their design hat by the arrival of generative AI. And I think it's good to go into things and saying, how could this be different? But I think it's also good to ask the question, what set of complex interests does the circumstances we have now serve? And how might throwing that out mess up some of the interests that are carefully balanced in what we have. My colleague, Mike Caulfield, has a funny way. He says, he's talking about community colleges, but he says, people are saying community colleges, they're so old, they're so outdated. Why are they doing things this way? They're ancient. And he's like, maybe they're ancient, but also maybe they're ancient like a great white shark, in the sense that the great white shark is also ancient and hasn't changed much in millions of years because it is perfectly adapted to the environment in which it lives. And it could be that community colleges are the way they are because they very inexpensively are extraordinary engines of social promotion in society that have all kinds of problems with them, but they also, with the amount of resources they have, do things about the best they could.
I wonder, though, with that, I'm thinking of an anecdote that's shared in the show. Yes, we do need to learn how to grind through certain things. We definitely want to be exposed to new topics that we might not know inherently we'd be interested in. But I think still at the core of that is, am I doing that with somebody who has some faith in me or is demonstrating to me, I think you can do this? Because you have this great anecdote of one student who shared, I went to ChatGPT because I really felt like my teacher was telling me I'm not a good writer when I believed I was, and I had teachers prior who were building that confidence in me. And so I wonder how maybe, again, this is a real moment of reflection on the relational aspect of teaching and learning together and how vulnerable of a dynamic that can be.
You're talking about a student named Amelia who thought of herself as a good writer and turned to AI, used it in a way that her teacher would not approve of on an extra credit assignment and got caught, and then had the embarrassment and humiliation of being caught. And she did not get what she needed from her teacher when she was struggling. And we don't know why. We didn't get a chance to talk to the teacher. Maybe the teacher would tell us, I really tried to say, Amelia, come talk to me. I want to help you with your writing. And she wouldn't do it. I don't know. That might be what we hear. That's not how it sounded from Amelia's perspective. And as I was talking with teachers, I eventually evolved this hypothesis, as I was talking with students, I eventually evolved this hypothesis that at least maybe this is some kind of selection bias, like who are the students who will talk to a journalist? But the students I spoke to all seemed to value learning. And the ones who admitted to using AI in some way that their school probably wouldn't approve of or their teacher wouldn't approve of, all described this moment of hitting some kind of wall. And at one point, I had a kind of chart of what I thought the walls were. And one of the walls was bad relationship with teachers. Another wall was somehow the value system around them values grades and that sort of success more than learning. Maybe that's something they're getting from their school. Maybe that's something they're getting from their teachers. Maybe that's something they're getting from their peers. Maybe it's they're doing too much work. They're up till midnight trying to get this homework done and they're exhausted and something has gone wrong in the way that assignments have been assigned to them. Maybe they're just stuck academically and they don't really know how to grind their way out of it. Maybe one student talked about senioritis, essentially being bored and lazy in his own words, and actually said, I wish that somebody had given me a little kick in the pants. I wish somebody had caught me using AI because I know I could have done better work if someone had caught me cheating on this sort of low-key assignment over and over again. And I was nervous about that presentation, about that sort of formulation of those 5 reasons. And there were a couple times where I was invited to schools to share my research and reporting. And when I brought this up, I saw a lot of nods and I was reassured by that teachers seemed to intuitively agree with that formulation. And a lot of times at the specific school, they could point their finger on, here's the one that our students are going to say is their wall. A school in the suburbs north of New York City, the teachers were like, yeah, it's going to be the academic thing. That's the wall that our students are going to hit. At another school where maybe doesn't have that academic high achieving culture, but maybe just has 35 kids in most classrooms and sinks and toilets that don't work very well. Maybe it's going to be, I don't have a good relationship with my teacher because my teacher doesn't necessarily have the time to cultivate good relationships with 150 students.
It does raise a great question. If you think that those relationships are really central to the educational process, you got to wonder what a machine that generates text does to those relationships. The main thing that's going to cultivate those relationships is people engaging with each other in really meaningful, authentic ways. If things which have historically been imperfect, but human generated conversations in spoken word and writing with each other starts getting taken over with adults and children passing machine generated text back and forth, you could imagine how poisonous that could potentially be to that relationship. And then as that relationship breaks down, there's less and less reason to not just be sending machine generated text back and forth between people.
Yeah, I think a lot of educators are talking about not wanting to be in that loop. And I think part of that is there are going to be some use cases for generative AI, though, where the opposite can happen, where we can do learning design that if I've got 35 students, it is really hard for me to be able to offer accommodations for every single student or demonstrate that personal knowledge. But I'm thinking for some students where I know that there's a different kind of scaffolding that they need. And in years past, I would not have been able to have done that. Generative AI can help. Again, I have to know that student well enough first. So there is some gray there. Hey, listeners, you know that when we talk to you about a show partner, we have taken great time and care to make sure that we are talking to you about partnerships that we use and trust ourselves. That's why I'm so excited to remind you of the incredible folks behind Poll Everywhere, the student response system that's trusted by over 1 million educators to transform lectures into interactive learning experiences. Poll Everywhere has just launched a brand new and improved version. And from experience, I can tell you it's a game changer. You can create engaging polls in seconds with their AI-powered tools, which integrate seamlessly with your LMS and make every class and conversation just a little more interactive without the hassle. Whether you're teaching a gigantic lecture hall or you've got a small group, Poll Everywhere makes that engagement faster, simpler, smarter. If you are ready to try it out, you can get $25 off with special code 25OFF. That's 25, capital O, capital F, capital F, at the link in our show notes. That promo code will be there where you can sign up, get ready to try it, and save a little bit from our friends at Poll Everywhere. One thing that I really also have to say, I think an educator would appreciate about your show was you really get and you call out like policy culture, where sometimes we either say, oh, we've got a policy that'll solve it. And I can't remember which episode, but you had someone who was reading out the language and it's, but what does this mean? And what do we mean by that? And then who is responsible for? And you really dug into, there are some schools and districts where they've had professional development, teachers feel supported. Maybe the policy has been put together collaboratively and everybody knows what the words mean. Other schools have teachers that have really just been left in the dark, and each and every one of them has to figure it out. And what that means for the students is every student has a different kind of teacher's approach, and the technology is moving so quickly. That means that it is very hard for anybody in education to say, how do we cope with this? And I think you had empathy for educators, and then also we hear the students empathizing for them as well. Do you want to touch on kind of that piece about just, my goodness, this is a hard chapter in the chapter of education.
It was extraordinary to me as a journalist and not somebody who studies schools primarily, how many teachers conveyed to me that they were figuring out this generative AI moment 3 years in now, more or less on their own. Are we concerned about AI cheating, or should we let our students have at it, figuring it out on your own? Maybe you're talking about it over coffee in the faculty lounge or on Tuesday night, a poker game or something like that. What about Grammarly? Should our students be using Grammarly? That's a kind of AI. Oh, does it trigger AI detection software? Turn it in? Oh, I heard that it does. No, I heard that it doesn't. Figuring it out on their own. Should we let our students use generative AI for brainstorming? What if they're doing homework at home and they pull out PhotoMath because they're stuck and they use that? Should we encourage that? Should we discourage that? Should we say it's okay to do it one time and then put it away? Should we role model that in class? Should we be experimenting with PhotoMath? Should we be experimenting with ChatGPT in class, brainstorming? Should we be having ChatGPT try our writing assignments out and then we all evaluate it as a class? And there are some schools that have convened these conversations about it. And the teachers don't always agree. They often have very different perspectives. But even when they disagree, I think even just having the opportunity to sit in a room somewhere, maybe be presented with a little bit of research, maybe be presented with a little bit of data, and then talk about it and with one another, when that happens, the teachers strike me as more comfortable. And I also think that the students are more likely to get a kind of clear statement of what the expectations are around responsible AI.
So because we've listened closely to educators and they told us they really want some kind of school-wide, district-wide approach to this, then we start running around and going, hey, school leaders, hey, district leaders, like you really need to have some policies. You need to have some professional development. And that triggers our deep empathy for district leaders and school leaders because they have no idea what the policies should be. They have no idea what the professional development should be because no one knows. That is just such a crucial part of this moment, which I think perhaps many educators are underestimating. Like, we do not know what good policy is. We do not know what good practice is. It will be a long time before we can confidently say we do. I started teaching students to search the web in 2003. The first peer-reviewed publication, which had really rigorous evidence of effective means of showing kids how to search the web, was published in 2019. That's 16 years. And in that 16 years, for most of the first decade and a half of it, we taught students the wrong way to search the web. We taught them what are now demonstrably ineffective methods, these checklist methods, things like the CRAP test, other sort of foibles like trust.org and .edu websites, over.com websites.
Don't go to Wikipedia.
Don't go to Wikipedia.
Right.
All
the hits.
All the hits. And they were all wrong. And if people are getting professional development from people who are doing stuff with AI, and they're saying this works, they do not know that. We are just beginning to be at the point where we can say, oh, I'm starting to get some initial sense from the experiences my students are having, but it takes a long time and a lot of work for a whole community to figure out what good practice looks like. So I think it's a moment for which, we should have empathy for all the actors in the room. So the teachers and the students, they want clear guidance. The district leaders and school leaders like to provide it, but they don't know what to do. So they have to guess. In making those guesses, in working through this, what will probably be a decade plus of uncertainty, we just need to have a lot of humility. We need to be able to say, this is what we're trying now. Here's the policy we're trying this fall, this grading period, this year. Here's the professional development with some ideas that you can try here. We're probably going to learn that some of the things we try are really bad ideas. And we need to tell students that, and we need to tell teachers that, and we need to all be ready to say, oh, hey, people had more time to look at this set of practices. And while we thought it was really neat to differentiate instruction using these tools, it turns out that when you do that, you create a bunch of low quality materials and actually learning go down in these kinds of ways. I'm not saying that's exactly what's going to happen. I'm saying that's the kind of finding that we could easily have in 5 years and 10 years. So it's tricky to say you have to deal with this because it's on the kids' phones. We don't have a choice as to whether or not we do something about it. But we hear a lot of times from people like, this is the future and we just have to do it. That's exactly what we said about mobile phones 10 years ago. And there's lots of schools all over the world that are going, oh, maybe the thing we have to do with it is get them out of the building because we can create better learning environments without them than with them. And there may be lots of places with AI that we come to that. We'll almost certainly do what we did with calculators, where we came to places where we said, all right, we're not going to get rid of calculators entirely, but we definitely have to constrain them. There are definitely parts of the learning experience that absolutely have to be calculator free because we need you to develop these skills that you can't with them. So we all need to have a lot of empathy for each other and bring a lot of humility to the uncertain years ahead.
It's almost, I was just going to say with the humility piece, I really that you bring out that timeline of we've been wrong before, we will be wrong again. But the important thing is that open dialogue, because we have so much to learn from one another. Your show points out the equity gap, though. There are, as someone who works with schools around the world, there were schools 2.5 years ago where we were developing lots of things. We had set up experimental kind of labs. And then, as you point out in the show, there are still some districts, for funding reasons, for a variety of reasons, that they have not been given that same opportunity. I wonder if in reflection of all the research and reporting that you've done, because you've had so many people open up to you, speak to you, and it's going to be on the record, I wonder if you have any thoughts on what it means to open up that dialogue where, yes, one of you said earlier, not everybody's going to be in agreement. We're never in agreement on, I could say, ice cream is free for a year, and not everybody's going to love that.
Those people are wrong, but yes.
Justin would love that.
Jesse, you want to talk about Winterset? Tricia, you're previewing one of our episodes coming up.
Yeah. So we have an episode coming up about a school that with a assistant principal who is really excited about AI and believes that the students at their school, it's a rural district in Iowa, in Madison County, famous for the bridges, if you remember the Meryl Streep and Clint Eastwood movie, believes that their students need to be exposed to generative AI. And he is enthusiastic about it and engaged many of the teachers in a process to figure out how to do that. And in doing it, he also engaged the AI skeptics and brought them into the committee. And there were moments where he wants to talk about how they're going to teach prompt engineering, and they're coming up with acronyms around prompt engineering. They're using the acronym that's the school mascot. And they have somebody in the room who's an AI skeptic who's saying, maybe this isn't a really good idea. And we were fortunate enough to observe that process. And Chad Sussex, the assistant principal, actually said it was really important to have those skeptics in the room. I'm excited about AI and I do want to expose our students to it, but having people who disagree with me about that, raising concerns and having us move slowly and having us think of this as an experiment that we are learning from and that we're being cautious about. And we're being a little bit skeptical of the consultants who are raising their hands right now and saying, I'll tell you what to do with AI, many of whom, if you read the 404 Media report that came out a few months ago, many of whom were funded and stood up by the AI industry. And many of them are, I think, sincerely enthusiastic about AI because they sense it's going to change the future in the workplace. And they're likely right about that. So I don't know. I think that the Winterset episode, it shows us a process by which schools can have these conversations as a community, bring in the skeptics, bring in the enthusiasts. And is it perfect? I don't think so. But too many schools aren't really doing that at all. And I think I said this earlier, but what I have heard from teachers is that when they've been brought into those conversations, when they've had a chance to talk with students about, how do you think you should be being exposed to AI? How do you use AI in your life? Do you think Grammarly should be cheating? Should we be letting you use PhotoMath on assignments? And they're talking to their peers, their fellow teachers about that, and they're talking to school leaders about that. And then they're evolving to some kind of policy. Maybe it's one of these stoplight models we've seen, like red means do not use AI, green means go ahead, yellow means ask your teacher. There just seems to be more comfort and more clarity about what the school is doing in this moment.
Justin, I felt like I had cut you, like I was going to cut in and you were going to say something, but maybe I imagined that.
No, I'm happy. The one thing I would jump in with is that we also have to remember all good design is balancing tensions. Jesse made a very compelling case for why schools as a community have to address AI. There's a long list of things that schools have to address. If you're a school that's still wrestling with chronic absenteeism, there's nothing else to solve until you solve that one. There are lots of schools in the southern part of the United States that have made some really great progress by bringing principles of the science of reading to improve reading instruction. If you're like on an agenda where you're seeing improvements in students reading and writing because of things you're doing, don't stop doing those things. Keep doing the good. There's still a zillion things that are going on in the world. It's one of the frustrating things about generative AI, its arrival, is that previous generations of technology, schools could very wisely choose to ignore. If you were a school that never bought smartboards, you're probably looking back on that moment being like, hey, look at the waste of time and money that we skipped. And in some ways, that's a better setup for schools when they can say, do we really want tablets? Is this the right moment? What if we bought them in 5 years after we let a bunch of other people figure out whether or not they're any good? That seems like maybe a reasonable thing for us. But there are certain ways I think schools can make some choices about how much they want to engage this conversation versus all the other things they could be doing to improve. But in secondary schools, it's really hard to do nothing at this point. Or if you're doing nothing, you're basically just driving a whole bunch of work and anxiety and aches down onto your teachers instead of wrestling with it together. So I always hate to say that there are things that schools have to do, because I really truly believe there are lots of ways to become a better school. And technology is one option, but not the only one. But this does feel different from what I've seen over the years that I've been doing this, where it's like, you really probably need to deal with this one sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about everything is contextual, and I've been wondering what it's even like bigger than an issue, what it means for us to be having this conversation in education on the back of the pandemic. I think the punch combination of disruption to education, I wonder how different it would be had the pandemic not happened. And I'm just wondering about that. There wasn't really like a recovery from that enormous fatigue. And I'm wondering if there's any other details that surfaced in your research and reporting where you're realizing the time at which this is playing out. Don't not pay some attention to this factor. I follow and research companion AI a lot, and I think I look at the marketing of that, and I think about economic burdens on parents and caregivers and that intersecting trend and what it means for those two things to happen simultaneously. Is there anything that, again, in the reporting, in the research, you were like, this intersects with this storyline in a way that maybe I did not anticipate, or this is a detail that's going to be pretty significant in the way this plays out?
I think there are a few things that help frame it, and then there's a few consequences of it. If you don't have the universal connectivity in school and out of school that the pandemic, it radically advanced above a trajectory that it was heading before, then you don't have the arrival of AI. 20 years ago when the web came out, schools more or less had a choice about adopting the web, because not every kid carried around a phone. Not every workstation had a computer at it. If you wanted your kids to look at Wikipedia, it was a certain amount of work to be like, okay, we are now going to the space, or we are moving these machines around, or you're logging in for a few minutes so that we can do that. That's different from students' access to Copilot in the Bing browser, which was just instantaneously available to all of them. That sort of forced things on schools. And then we should remember that schools are totally maxed out. Their capacity to deal with new things, with new challenges, is as low as it has been in 50 years. The teacher morale, just by surveys and things like that, is its lowest point in 50 years. So these are systems that are really struggling. There's you can go some places which feel pretty post-pandemic. You can go some places in which the legacy of the pandemic feels really immediate and urgent in terms of their absenteeism numbers, in terms of the degree of learning difficulties and the even lower levels of preparation they might expect of their students. One thing that we could ask policymakers to do in thinking about that is recognize that if your policy program is to ask schools to just do another thing, you have a bad policy program. If your policy is do more stuff, cram more in there, you can just be sure that's not going to work. Schools do not have an infinite capacity to absorb the social problems of society. They actually have a pretty limited capacity to get better. They're wonderful people working on them. They're brilliant. They're committed. They don't improve quickly. That is just like a feature of schools that you could look at. For folks who are interacting with policy people, if they're coming to you and saying, man, we need you to do more AI, you really have to ask, what are you going to let us do less of? What are you going to take off the plate of schools that we don't have to do anymore? Because any proposal to add major commitments to schools that doesn't take away something else is not a serious proposal. And it has the unfortunate characteristic of letting policy people feel like they're doing something and give grants to other policy people and experts and stuff like that without really sort of solving the problems of schools. And unfortunately, we've seen that with the past 20 years of technological literacy efforts. There was a web literacy effort and CS for all and digital literacy and all these kinds of things, and they don't work very well. They don't really change what happens in schools, in part because there aren't resources that are associated with them, and we aren't willing to reorganize schools to make the kind of instruction we want possible, because it means taking something else away. We have to ask serious questions about, like, all right, so if you want there to be a whole lot more of this, do you want less French? Do you want less science? Do you want less math? Do you want less reading? Do you want less gym? Do you want less art? There has to be a less of something in order for more to get in there. There's a little bit of creative squeezing educators can do, But I don't think the evidence is that kind of creative squeezing of technology actually works all that well in terms of student learning outcomes after a decade in schools.
It may also, I think, for some school leaders be tempting to think, if I encourage my faculty to engage with generative AI right now, they will find all sorts of efficiencies and time saving, and that will allow them to focus on some of the problems that we're trying to solve, or focus on building their relationships with students. And we have an episode on this coming out. I think of the 90 plus teachers we spoke to, I can think of one who said that he is finding significant time-saving advantages due to generative AI. Several might talk about little things. Oh, I organized my field trip groups using ChatGPT. I randomized where the students sit according to ChatGPT. Some interesting experiments with feedback on writing, initial feedback on class writing, or that sorts of things. But there's really only one out of 90 who's, yeah, this is absolutely saving me like an hour or a half an hour routinely. And I'm using that time to address the more urgent needs of the school and of my students.
Looking forward to future episodes. And again, I'm wondering if the show will encourage others to say, how might we do like a micro version of this where we do some surveying? I love that you opened with this idea of you don't have to launch right into the question about AI, get a better sense of how was your school experience, or even a step upstream from that question. Do you have any advice for a school leader who's saying, I want to do our own little like mini investigation? Because I would argue, I think a lot of us adults are totally unaware of the many different use cases that teens, preteens are exploring with generative AI. And it's good to just admit what we don't know, sit and listen. How do you get people to open up, to share some things that maybe they, again, would not ordinarily feel like, oof, should I say this out loud?
We were just talking about this, and I think Justin has some very specific actionable advice. I will say it has been hard to find students to talk to. And we actually worked with this nonprofit organization in tandem that specializes in recruiting students to speak with researchers and journalists. And often journalists are like everybody else. How do you find a student? You ask around, who do you know? And so the students you're going to find are likely to be your friends' kids who are likely to live in your area and likely to have the same socioeconomics and sort of cultural worldviews and all of those things. But I think that a school actually has the capacity to, I've seen this happen. Justin told this story. You can find 5 or 10 students who want to talk about AI, and you can say, you're not going to get in trouble. We just want to know what's on your mind. Please tell us, how are you using AI? How are you thinking about AI? And I think when the school has done a good job creating the boundaries around that conversation and making the students feel welcome, the students love to talk about it. They have a lot to say, and they want to talk about their experiments with AI and how they feel they might be using AI, maybe as a tutor to study, or maybe as an idea getter, or maybe they're using companion AI or AI chatbots in some ways that's interesting. Maybe they're playing Dungeons and Dragons with their AI or something like that. And so I found that when you're able to make a safe space for the conversation, students have a lot to say and they're excited to talk.
If I was a school leader or district leader, one step I might add to Jesse's protocol from the hazard that he offered, if you just say, who's nearby, you're going to get the president of the honor council and the color guard. And I would get a list of the entire student body, and I would get a random number generator, and I would
ChatGPT can do that.
I would have ChatGPT randomly pick 5 people out of that list, and I would hunt them down and do whatever it takes to talk to them. And my hunch is most students would go, I'm going to go talk. The principal's going to buy me pizza one afternoon. We're going to sit and talk about how I do my and you got to think carefully. Do you want to ask about ChatGPT, or do you just want to ask about their work and their experience with school? The thing about asking about their work and their experience in school is you say, can you tell me a little bit about how you do your homework? And they might say nothing about ChatGPT, and that's because they're being honest, and that could be important. And it might be like, then you ask about ChatGPT and they say, oh, there's 3 circumstances in which, and they're not going to be this articulate, but there's 3 things that I do. It's when it's late at night and I can't finish. It's when I don't like my teacher, or the thing that we hear all the time is, oh, when it's busy work, when it's just not assignments that are worth me doing. which students might not be the best judge of. Sometimes they are and sometimes they aren't. But I would say randomly pick people. I would do the same thing with faculty. Randomly pick faculty to talk to and make time to listen. And the point of the random number generator, the random name generator, is to take you away from the people who you're naturally closest to and towards just whoever is out there. A couple of years ago, I wrote a book called Iterate, The Secret to Innovation in Schools, which has a whole chapter on assessing any kind of initiative. And it's got a bunch of like really specific suggestions about that kind of practice and a whole bunch of other sorts of things. But don't let any kind of like technical know-how, or don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. If the best you can, I had a colleague, Pat Larkin, who was a principal at Burlington High School for a while. And this was a while ago, as soon as laptops came out, he like just left his office and he put a desk in the entryway of the school. And he was like, why don't I just work there? Yeah, I'm just checking. I got a bunch of paperwork to do. Why not do it where all the students are walking by all the time? So you can also just like sit at the random table at the cafeteria, make yourself available in the locker room, in the hallway, be out there and talk to folks. And it's going to be super fun for two reasons. One, it's just an amazing time in the history of education if you like observing what's going on in schools. And two, once you get people talking, most teachers and most students don't really feel like they have people that they can talk to about their experiences. Very few people feel like there's someone who for 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes will just let them talk about what they're experiencing. And most of the people who agree to do interviews with us are pretty grateful for the chance to share their story. For people thinking about starting something like this, you might start by thinking that they're doing you a favor, but it might be later that you learn that they're really benefiting from it too.
I think we underestimate what a gift it can be just to offer somebody the space to voice their opinion in a non-judgmental way. One of my favorite questions has been to ask, like, when is the last time you were working on something and you actually had no motivation whatsoever to use a tool like ChatGPT? Because I think we have a lot to learn from those moments too, of like, when are you maybe in that organic state of flow and you really want to own this process, or it's just something that you enjoy. And that's really fascinating too. The Homework Machine ongoing. When is the series wrapping? I actually don't think I know that detail. And will there be a season 2? Can I ask that?
I would love for there to be a season 2. I think we're going to have to figure out whether there is some kind of funding, because the series was generously supported by several funders. I don't have time to name them all here. They're in our credits. And I think if there's funding available, Justin and I will talk about what a season 2 might look like. We have 3 formal episodes planned for September. I am thinking about maybe a 4th bonus episode around the question of AI literacy, which Justin has a lot of fascinating thoughts about. And we keep encountering, and it keeps not quite fitting into the episodes we've made up to this point. So probably sometime in September, we will be mostly done.
The one other resource that we have available to folks is that we've just released a guidebook for educators, a guide to AI in schools, perspectives for the perplexed. And that's available at tsl.mit.edu/AI-guidebook. And it's entirely populated by things that practicing educators have said. So you don't have to worry about a little bit of pinhead MIT people with a preface and a little bit of editorial help from Julie Smith, a brilliant CS education researcher, but almost all the ideas are generated by classroom educators who have wonderful thoughts about things they're excited to try, who disagree with each other, and who are wrestling with this just alongside folks. But I think in this moment, some of the best people that we can listen to are our colleagues, especially the ones who are close to the problem. The people who are like actually practicing classroom educators are the ones who I think right now are going to have the most wisdom about what's going on and what we might try next.
Great. Thank you both. I want to wish you the best of luck. And yeah, I hope there's a few surprise bonus episodes in a season 2 as well. Congratulations again on the Homework Machine.
Thanks, Tricia. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
If you liked this episode, we are going to end with a trailer so that you can get a little more of a sneak peek about the Homework Machine. You will find links to it, as well as links to learn more about Jesse and Justin in the show notes. See you next week.
When ChatGPT showed up, some students saw a shortcut.
It just writes it for you, and it's really thorough. It's really good. You guys should try it.
But teachers saw something more alarming.
I can't help you improve your writing if you're not writing it.
You got to learn to think for yourself before you ask a tool to think for you.
It's been nearly 3 years since AI crashed the party in education.
I don't want to sound like an alarmist, but
MIT's Teach Lab presents The Homework Machine, a series about K-12 education in the age of artificial intelligence.
Hey folks, thank you for tuning in this week to our conversation. If you are wondering where you might learn a little more from us, if you've been following the show for a while, you may not know that there has been a brand new newsletter released. It's free. It's called AI Forward, and specifically it's for folks in K-12 leadership. If you'd like to check that out and you'd like to give it a follow, the link is also in the show notes. Also, if you've got requests, you've got questions for the podcast or for the newsletter, our email address is there as well. We love hearing from listeners. See you again next week.
Hey there, dedicated listener. If you've made it this far, we know you're passionate about shifting the way education works. And Tricia and I appreciate you. If you loved what you heard today, we'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to rate and review Shifting Schools wherever you listen to podcasts. Those ratings help us reach even more educators just like you. And if you know someone who could benefit from these conversations, please share this episode with them. Just one person. Think of the impact we can make together. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter for even more great content. And if you haven't already, join us at Camp Shifting Schools, where the conversations keep going long after the podcasts end. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and thank you for being part of Shifting Schools.